We've recently received a bunch of very interesting information about the upcoming update for Space Engineers 2, which will add the new Overhauled survival mode to the game, and also these spectacular looking planets as well. So, without wasting any time, let's get right into it. One of the first things we're going to talk about is a potentially controversial change/feature coming to Space Engineers 2. Now, before we go into it, I need you to promise to me, look at me directly in the eyes, you need to promise to me that you will not comment anything until I have explained everything to do with this. I don't want you to get halfway through and start commenting something. You have to wait until I've explained everything, okay? You're going to look really stupid if you don't follow that instruction. So, in Space Engineers 2, they were previously developing a Sandbox Mode, which is very similar to Space Engineers 1 Survival, and a Campaign Mode, which was basically a story mode for Space Engineers 2. Now, as far as we understood it, the Campaign Mode would have missions, and each of those missions would be separate from each other, but now they are merging the two concepts into one. Why merge them into one? Why not keep them separate? Well, for starters, they didn't want to split their focus and wanted to focus on one vision for Space Engineers 2. Working on two separate versions of Space Engineers 2 made it too complicated, so merging them together is the best of both worlds. So, what does this mean? First, I'm going to read you out what the developers have said about it, and then I'm going to explain to you what it means, okay? Good. Remember, you're not allowed to comment yet. So, how will the story work within the Sandbox Mode? And spoilers for those people that care about that kind of thing. It starts with the cutscene, who you are, what the Bearing Project is, what Almagest is, and who your brother is. The FTU, which is the first time user experience, begins, you repair a ship, build a small spaceship, and then reach an orbital station. The first time user experience is basically a tutorial for new players of the game, and if you want to know more about what this will entail, we've covered it in depth in this video here. From there, you take contracts and missions that progress the colonization of the Almagest. Some missions push the story forward, not just the colonization meta, and we covered the colonization system in this video here as well. Cutscenes play at the beginning and end of key missions, but they will avoid anything the player could have influenced, e.g. ships, destroyed stuff, character skins, etc., because the cutscenes are pre-rendered. There will be data pads and hidden locations to reveal more of the world and its mysteries. I'm looking forward to tell you the story of Almagest. It's deep, has a big twist, and is quite personal, shaped by how I see the world. Additionally, there was a developer diary that followed up on this one, and went over players' biggest questions about the new combined sandbox and story experience. Story is optional, sandbox is still king. The idea is not to force a story or a campaign on players who just want to build, explore, or set their own goals. SC2 is still a sandbox first game. The story is there if you want it. You can accept missions from NPCs or the contract block, or simply play freeform sandbox. Some of these missions are part of the colonization of the Almagest, our meta progression loop. This system unlocks new areas, resources, blocks, upgrades and more. It is not mandatory, and take note of that, it is not mandatory, but it's a key way to grow your capabilities and unlock more of the world. Separate from colonization, some missions push the story forward, including cutscenes and narrative moments. The story layer is completely optional. If you ignore both the colonization missions and the story, you'll have a pure sandbox experience. You decide how deep you want to go. Colonization, story, both or neither. But what about multiplayer? The last blog post focused on single player, but here's our current thinking on multiplayer. Co-op story mode. Your friends join your world. You play as Miro Sokol, and they're your companions. Together, you experience the story. Vanilla sandbox servers. On public or dedicated servers, the story is turned off. Nobody is Miro Sokol. Everyone starts freely, just like the classic SE sandbox. So, the fact that multiplayer has the ability to turn the system off means if you don't want the system, of course you're going to be able to turn it off. I don't know why anyone would think that wouldn't be the case. Space Engineers 1 has like a million world options, like more than you could ever need. I haven't pressed half these buttons. That's not true, I definitely have. But everything in Space Engineers 1 is completely configurable, so I don't know why you wouldn't think Space Engineers 2 would be. The same for the first time user experience. I can guarantee you're able to turn that off. There is no way that's going to be mandatory every time you start a new survival world. But I don't think any of this is a bad thing. We spoke about the story and lore of Space Engineers 2 in depth in this video here, and in my opinion, it's very, very interesting, so check that video out if you're interested. And don't forget, if you want a complete lore video of Space Engineers 1, that's coming when I hit 75,000 subscribers. So all of you keep up the good work of hitting that subscribe button. We got a 12-minute video out of all these scraps of lore for Space Engineers 2. There is leagues more for Space Engineers 1, so I promise it'll be worth your while. Anyway, the point is, having lore and story in Space Engineers 2 allows us to have set locations in the world with history, set characters with real wants and motivations, and this story adds a central mystery for us to uncover as part of the game. And for a lot of players, those are very appealing features to get them invested in the game. And if that's not appealing to you, they've said multiple times that you can just ignore it and not do missions. You don't have to do any of the story missions. You don't even have to do any of the colonization missions. You can play completely sandbox if you wish. Subnautica has a story, but you don't really have to do Subnautica's story to play the game. If you want to complete the game, sure, but you couldn't complete Space Engineers 1, so not completing the story in Space Engineers 2 is basically like playing Space Engineers 1. Sons of the Forest has a story, but you don't have to engage with it at all. If you want, you can just play survival in a forest, build a base, build traps, convert cannibals into hundreds of bones for some macabre reason. And whilst they're in a totally different genre, all Bethesda games do this, to the point that it's almost become a meme not to complete the main story in their games. Skyrim, Fallout 4, Starfield, in all of those games, you do the tutorial, and then you're pretty much free to do whatever you want. At no point are you limited by anything in the game. So why would Space Engineers 2 having a story suddenly limit your ability to do sandbox? I don't see a way how this could make Space Engineers 2 worse. In the normal sandbox mode, it's the same map, but it's just empty. Whereas with the story content, the map would have several story locations like faction bases, historical landmark, and lore that ties them all together. For example, it'd be cool if you visited a planet and you could find a landmark to indicate some sort of catastrophe that happened, like a colony ship that crashed or something. And because that's part of the lore of the game, NPCs in the world will know about it and will be able to inform you about what happened. Or maybe one of the faction's main bases could be a space station that you visit. And the station is full of these NPCs and they trade and they do stuff. And in the station, there's a couple of name characters and you can have little conversations with them, only simple ones. You can just ask them a couple of questions or whatever. And because these are real characters and it's a real location, the star system that Space Engineers 2 takes place in actually feels like a real place with real locations and real characters and real people inhabiting it. If NPCs only exist to do random encounters or are randomly generated for a location, that's boring, it's not real. But if these set NPC characters exist that have more dimension to them other than just supplying quests, that would be amazing. And as I spoke about in my video about the lore of Space Engineers 2 that we know so far, there are some very interesting things going on in the Amateur system, such as precursor races, alien artifacts, and a bunch of other things which seem to tie into a central mystery in this star system for us to uncover. And this mystery also seems to serve a gameplay purpose, giving a reason to travel around the map and explore and build. Like for example, there's quotes on the loading screen for Space Engineers 2 that indicate there's some sort of mystery under the ocean of Byblos, the water planet, and there being something down there to discover gives you a reason to build something like a submarine to explore under the ocean of the planet. There's also quotes indicating something similar with the brown dwarf star Delphos that sits at the centre of our star system. There seems to be some sort of mystery with the brown dwarf, and like the Delphos mystery, going near a brown dwarf star could also present engineering challenges for us to overcome. For a lot of players, those mysteries present a reason to do things like engineer and explore. Whereas without them, if you want to build a submarine, you just have to do it for the sake of it. There's no reason to do it for a lot of players. Like, I get if you want to play sandbox, it's fine, you can do that. I cannot think of anything stopping you. But for those that want more, going through the game and discovering lore and uncovering a mystery and experiencing set pieces for all the different missions sounds awesome. I don't know how you could not want that. But even if you don't have to do it. It doesn't affect anything. Nothing has changed. Or at least nothing has changed for the sandbox players. Because for the non-sandbox players, we have got something very exciting on the horizon. Right, you can comment about the story stuff now if you wish, but we're going to move on to everything else because that took way longer than I expected it to. To start with, whilst I'll probably cover this in a dedicated video for Space Engineers 1, they did show a teaser of the next update for Space Engineers 1, showing off the new planters in space and showing how decompression causes the crops planted in them to die. And also they showed off that it's going to be foraging mechanics added to Space Engineers 1, which is very interesting, but again I'm going to cover those in a dedicated Space Engineers 1 video, so like and subscribe if you want to see that. But back to Space Engineers 2, because a video showing an up-close look of the new clouds in the game. You can see in this video here they fly through a cloud, cursor, and once they fly through the clouds, you can see the planet below, and then they fly back through, and then we're back inside the cloud again. Now this isn't necessarily a major feature, but it's one I'm personally very excited for, because as I've said before, I love the idea that I can just sit my ship in a cloud and you can't see it. Or even better, we can have a battle in a cloud and you're just ducking in and out, hiding from your opponent. The vision is there, it sounds amazing, I can't wait to try it out. We also got a bunch of new images of planets, and wowee, this looks amazing. First of all, cable, just had to get it out of the way guys. Second of all, there's a couple of things you might notice in this screenshot. Obviously there's a bunch of new flora that we haven't seen before. Some of these trees are new, these plants over here are new, the little grass poking out of the sand is new as far as I'm aware. Big trees, small trees, lots of different trees. Space Engineers 1 had pretty much like 2 trees, so this all looks promising. On the right, you can see there's a riverbed, but there's no water yet. Obviously, we'll get water in that riverbed when water is added to Space Engineers 2. But the most important thing in this screenshot is if you come up here, there's an overhang, which was not at all possible in Space Engineers 1. In Space Engineers 1, mountains and stuff just go vertical or slowly slant up to a point. They don't go back out afterwards. But this over here is an example of a cliff face with an overhang, presumably naturally generated. We know that caves are going to be something that randomly generate in Space Engineers 2, so I presume this overhang here is potentially generated in the same way. This also unlocks the ability to have natural features such as arches as well. One of the things I'm excited for in Space Engineers 2 is just how good the geography looks of the game. Like, different places of the game will actually look unique. So if there's things like overhangs and arches in different locations in the world, it would make these locations more recognizable. And maybe we could call this overhang, I don't know, the Cliffs of Zero or something like that. And that would be a set location that all players of the game would know that, oh, this is the Cliffs of Zero. I'm going to land here next to the river and build my base here or something like that. I'm going to be like the only guy going around the world and mapping it out and giving all the locations names. But it's just one of those weird things that really excites me about the game. Brand new solar system, completely untouched by people, and we get to go around and name everything. Like No Man's Sky, but not randomly generated, actually good. That was one screenshot. We yapped for way too long about the overhang. Let's look at something that's actually really interesting in one of these screenshots. This one is still on the beach and there's still a cable. But if we take a look on the top right, because they don't have the interface hidden, you can see it says stranded. Find the entrance to the old hangar. And below it, we've got an arrow that's pointing. Presumably this is some sort of marker. And then it has collapsed entrance and then 6,497 meters. And then we'll come back to this bit below in a minute. So presumably, like I said, this arrow is a marker and it points to wherever this collapsed entrance is. And the distance below is how far it is away. And based on other things we know, this collapsed entrance is linked to this find the old hangar above. This is the first time user experience of Space Engineers 2. When you start the game, the ship you're on is attacked, and you somehow make your way down to Verja, the Earth-like planet. And once you're there, you have to find this old hangar, and then mine out the entrance to find the ship inside, which you will then repair, and it will then become your first vehicle of the game. As I've said in many videos before, the marker system in Space Engineers 1 drives me up the wall, and already this seems to be way better. Having an arrow that points you where to go, rather than just a square on your screen and you're like looking around to try and find where it is, this is already 10 times better. And for new players especially, having objectives on the top right telling you what to do, I think will be a very good step towards getting a lot of people into the game. As I've mentioned before, the learning curve of Space Engineers 1 is very steep. So having this new guided way through the early game to explain all the basic mechanics and get new players started will be a big help to the game. I also can't get over how good the terrain looks in the background of this. A lot of it's obscured by trees, but just look at this area over here across the river, and then this mountain on the side. Oh, I can't wait to go here. It's going to be great. Below the collapsed entrance, we can see a list of ores. This top one is a little bit difficult to make out on the background, but they all seem to be at the location of the collapsed entrance, and there's at least nickel and silicon there. I'm going to guess there's an ore detector at this old hangar, and because we are in range of its antenna, the ore detector is able to broadcast to us. But on the bottom left, our broadcasting is turned off, so maybe that's not the case. Maybe broadcasting isn't implemented yet. This is still all work in progress. I'm going to speed run through the rest of these planet images, only pointing out a couple of things that I think are important. Obviously, as with all of them, this one looks absolutely beautiful, and also cable. But there are a couple of other things to point out on this. For starters, the gravity of the planet, which is presumably Verja, the Earth-like planet, is only 0.68 Gs, which is odd. On the previous screenshot, it is covered up by the work in progress symbol, so we can't see what the gravity is. But it's worth noting that on other screenshots, this gravity number changes. So I would suggest that maybe the gravity of this planet isn't completely finished, as it would be a little bit odd for it to change this significantly in different areas of the planet. Another thing worth noting on the screenshot is if you look in the top left, the arrow that we saw previously that indicated where the hangar was, is blue for some reason. It's obscured by the work in progress sign, but it appears that the text for a hidden entrance is also blue. Maybe this is an example of recoloring the markers, or maybe there's something else at play here. This screenshot here, obviously different foliage again, different trees. It looks like there's going to be a lot of tree variety in Space Engineers 2. And in the bottom right, we can see that the gravity is now 0.76, which is up 0.08 from the last screenshot. So that's very interesting again. Is that indicative of anything, or is that just a work in progress thing? I'm sure we'll find out. And our arrow is still blue on the right, which again, I'm not really sure if that means anything. This screenshot here, slightly different angle. We can see some terrain in the distance and what is presumably going to be a riverbed down here. Once again, our arrow is blue. We can't see the ores as well, which is probably important to note. Maybe the arrow on the previous screenshot was white because it was combining the collapse entrance with the different ore signatures, but now because you can't see the different ore signatures, it just goes blue because it's the only one there. Or again, maybe you can just recolor the marker. And our gravity is once again changed. There's now 0.72. This one appears to be a different angle of one of the previous screenshots. And we can see that our ore signatures are back, but we're slightly further away. And the arrow is white again, so I'm leaning more towards that combined signals idea for the colour of the arrow. Although I'm curious why it goes orange and doesn't go blue. Oh well, I'm sure we'll find out one day. Once again, beautiful screenshot, cable, white arrow, a new type of tree, awesome stuff. There's 2 left. I don't really have anything more to add because the gravity is hidden and the marker doesn't really change from the last 2. I know visuals aren't everything, but man, these screenshots look so good. It's such a massive step up from Space Engineers 1. And this is the final screenshot of planets. You can see they're flying around again. We've got a couple of different trees, which are interesting. However, there is one thing I want to draw your attention to in this screenshot, and that's our arrow has changed to what seems to be some sort of icon with plates on top of each other, I guess. We can see that our list of ores have changed as well. It's now iron, iron, nickel, nickel, silicon, and silicon, whereas previously we only had nickel and silicon. Not sure if that's indicative of anything. And I'm going to presume that in all the other screenshots we were looking away from this collapse entrance, so it was an arrow to indicate to turn around. But in this screenshot we are looking directly to where this collapse entrance is, so it appears as a steel plates icon. As I said before, I hate the marker system in Space Engineers 1. It just hurts my brain having a million markers on screen at once. And this marker seems to have an icon on it. So potentially in Space Engineers 2, rather than just setting the color of the marker, we're also able to set an icon for it. Or maybe because this is a mission, being the tutorial mission, this steel plates icon indicates that it's a main story mission. Or maybe just a mission in general. It's all very interesting to think about. After the initial Earthlight screenshots were released, there were 3 more released in the later Dev Diary that I'll just add in here. There's not any new information in these, they're just showing off the visuals of Space Engineers 2. The first one is a mountain in the background and then a beautiful cloud on the left. This one here is the same kind of area, except the mountain has moved on to the right, and we can see in the distance a desert as well. And you can see there is a curvature to this cloud up here. Presumably this is curving with the planet. It does look very cool regardless. And the final Earthlight screenshot is just the mountain by itself, and this looks absolutely beautiful. Once again, I can't wait to get planets in Space Engineers 2 and just explore them and name all the landmarks. It's going to be so much fun. There's a couple of other things to go through. First of all, we have the most important feature coming to Space Engineers 2, a feature that is absolutely game-changing. It is going to absolutely revolutionize Space Engineers 2. You have no idea how good this feature is. It's colored icons. Let's give a clap, everyone. Let's give a clap to Keen Software House for adding colored icons. Thank Clang, thank the cable, thank whoever in Space Engineers you pray to. We finally have colored icons as a base game feature. Praise be. There's a couple of other things to actually look at in these colored icons, which conveniently I'm only able to recognize because they're colored icons. Crazy. For starters, we see our first look at what appears to be an atmospheric thruster. Aside from concept art, we haven't seen any atmospheric thrusters in Space Engineers 2, so presumably, with it having a turbine out the front, this is what it's going to look like. There's a couple of blocks here that have been shown but aren't actually in game yet. For example, this up here is a hydrogen tank, and we have the fabricator, smelter, and gearforge down here, which also aren't in game. And this block over here, we haven't been shown at all so far, but I believe it is the survival kit based on this concept art here. It looks almost identical to this concept art, so I'm going to presume that's what it is. This here is our first look at the cryopod in Space Engineers 2. We've previously seen no other images of this, and it's quite funny the only version of it we have seen is a broken version of it, with this screenshot showing off how it fractures. But even with it in pieces, I do think this looks very good. Much better than the Space Engineers 1 default version. Mainly because it has this big window on the front here, which presumably, much like the lab vat which was recently added to Space Engineers 1, you'll be able to see the engineers sleeping inside. And that was amazing in Space Engineers 1, so I'm sure it's going to be amazing in Space Engineers 2 as well. We also get to look here at 2 water-related blocks. The first one here is the water turbine, which answers the question I get on nearly every Space Engineers 2 video. Can you use water to generate power? Can I build a dam to generate power? Yes. This is concept art for it, but the water turbine name has been in the files for the game for a while, so we've known for a while that something like this is coming, but it's nice to get a first look at it. This isn't necessarily what it will look like in game. Obviously it's just concept art, but it's interesting nonetheless. Also, as someone who loves spinning things, I like over here that it shows that it'll spin faster the more water is flowing through it, and it has a little light on the side here that indicates how much energy it's generating. You just know that stuff is going to look amazing when it's in game. And the faster it spins, the better it will look. More spinning means more winning. And speaking of spinning blocks, we get an in-game render of a new spinning block, the underwater thruster. We were previously shown concept art for this, but this appears to be the final version of it that will be making its way into the game. Being an underwater thruster, we'll presumably have to put this on our submarines and boats, and then use it to move on the water. I wonder what specifically separates this from having a thruster on the outside of your ship and using it to boost along. I'm not opposed to there being underwater thrusters, I actually really like the idea. But what advantages do I get to using this over just a normal thruster? Presumably it's much more effective underwater, like specifically the thruster has to be underwater? I don't know. But it spins, so I can't wait until it's added to the game. Last couple of things to go through. They released a video showing off safe zones in Space Engineers 2, and whilst that is something very interesting by itself, that isn't the most interesting thing in this video. The video starts with them opening up the debug menu, and on the right we can see a bunch of new debug options to do with survival. So options to turn survival on and off, enable destruction, infinite energy, stuff like that. But the main thing I want to draw your attention to is this up here, which is damage sources. So most of these are normal, suffocation, weapon damage, explosion, etc. But the one I want to draw your attention to is radiation damage. Radiation was something that was recently announced that is coming to Space Engineers 1, but as far as we're aware, the new survival features that are going to be added to Space Engineers 1 are currently not planned for Space Engineers 2, but radiation damage being here might indicate that might not be the full case. Or alternatively, they've just grabbed all the damage definitions from Space Engineers 1 and just imported them into Space Engineers 2 for debugging purposes. As we always say with these things, this is work in progress, so we're not necessarily sure how indicative this is of anything coming to Space Engineers 2. That being said, I think it would be cool to get radiation from the get-go. As the video goes forward, they spawn in a safe zone to test with, and it looks very similar to what it does in Space Engineers 1. And as they open up their inventory to get out a drill to show that the safe zone is working, you get to see a bunch of new items for Space Engineers 2. The first one here is an oxygen recharge, which is presumably a bottle of oxygen we use to refill our suit. The second one is a suit battery, presumably the same thing for energy. The third is a med kit, which presumably heals you. And then the fourth, we don't get hovered over, but presumably it's a hydrogen bottle for refilling your suit's hydrogen. You can also see that there is 4 of every tool here, and as you can see as they hover over them, much like Space Engineers 1, there are different tiers of tool. So this is a Drill Mark 3, which is 100% faster than the Drill Mark 1, and the Drill Mark 2 is 33% faster than the Drill Mark 1, so there's a clear step up there. They take a moment to demo that the drill isn't working within the safe zone, and it's also worth noting I think this is the first time we've actually seen the drill in first person. I think so far we've only seen it in third person. And then they take the drill outside of the safe zone, and on the right hand side you can see something very interesting. It says terrain scanned, asteroid rocks 04, which is the voxel texture, and then, interestingly, ores detected, iron ore 48%, nickel ore 6%, silicon ore 6%, and debris 40%. So this is new. There's either 2 schools of thought with this. Number 1, in Space Engineers 1, when you refine stone, it converts into different ingots, and potentially this Asteroid Rocks 4 converts into this ratio of ingots. So around 50% iron, 6% nickel, 6% silicon, and then whatever 40% debris means. Or alternatively, maybe our drill is able to scan in an area and it can see all of the ores that are detected on this asteroid. So this asteroid has a big deposit of iron on it, and whatever a big deposit of debris is, and then a small patch of nickel and silicon. Or alternatively, option 3, maybe the way ores work in Space Engineers 2 is entirely changed, and it works completely differently than how we think. Later in this video, in order to demo that building is disabled in the safe zone, they spawn in their blueprint. However, interestingly, because they are in survival mode, they are still able to place the blueprint, but it places it into projection rather than a completed ship. This is one of the survival features of Space Engineers 2. In survival mode, when you place down blocks, rather than placing down the frames and needing steel plates or whatever initial component you need to place blocks, you now place projections instead, which allows you access to things like symmetry, and as we just saw, placing blueprints. In survival mode, they just place down projections instead, to make building much easier in survival. And this video here, despite not being about this, is our first visual example of that in game. We've received a teaser showing the volumetric water flowing down some slopes. In the before, the water seems quite sluggish going down the hill, but in the after, it seems more fluid, it looks more realistic. I'm not necessarily sure what the exact difference between the two is, but it definitely looks better in the second example. However, in both of these, the water does look very good. It's also worth noting that this teaser is at 60 FPS. Now, for some reason, a lot of teasers for Space Engineers 2, not specifically water teasers, but it does affect lots of those, are limited to this weird frame rate. I think it's around 20, and it does make these teasers look quite choppy, but this one is at 60 FPS all the way through. I've seen a lot of people saying that the performance of Space Engineers 2 looks bad, and I think that's just because a lot of the teasers are weirdly capped at a certain frame rate. But as you can see here, this is normal Space Engineers 2, and it is running at 60 FPS with the water flowing down the hill. So to all those doubters out there, it is possible. There's this image here just called concept art, and whilst on the left we can see the underwater thruster, we have already seen that in game, so we're just going to ignore that. But on the right we can see another bit of concept art of an NPC for Space Engineers 2. So previously we saw a similar design to this, which we were told was a main character in Space Engineers 2, which I believe to be the faction leader of a faction called the Legion of Engineers, which we spoke about in the lore video if you want to know more about that. And presumably this design looks slightly less regal, but still is clearly a Legion of Engineers design, so I'm going to guess that this is a normal Legion of Engineers suit. Although, saying that, I have just seen that it says Legion of Engineers NPC down here, so that answers that question. But still, I think this is a normal Legion of Engineers NPC, and the other suit that we saw that was similar to this was the leader of their faction. And finally, not really a teaser, but the developers wanted to show off some bugs they found while working on Space Engineers 2. But I'm not really sure this is a bug, as this is a biblically accurate representation of what happens to my face when I see a cable. So you're all up to date with everything they've spoke about recently for Space Engineers 2, but obviously more stuff for Space Engineers 2 will be coming out in the future, and I don't know if it's just me, but the stuff we keep finding out about seems to get more and more exciting as we go along. Also, we have that teaser for Space Engineers 1 that I will definitely be covering in a future video, so whether you're interested in Space Engineers 1 or 2, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel to see more videos like this one. And a special thanks to my supporters, which you can see on screen here. And if you want to become a supporter of this channel, you can become a YouTube member or a Patreon with the links in the description below.